Welcome back from wherever you are in the world. It's a joy and an honor to have you with us. My name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Zaya Benazzo.
We are speaking with you from the unceded territory of the coastal Milwaukee, southern Pomo. Commonly named in the colonial name is Sebastopol, California. So we place ourselves geographically as well.
And the opening song was from our guest today, Haidar Eid. And
should we read the bio so we introduce Haider?
Yeah. We have two guests today, Haidar Eid and Neta Golan, and we're delighted to have them with us. Haidar, can you speak about your life? What happened since this movie was created? And where are you today?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Zaya and Maurizio, and everybody, by the way, for the invitation. One is a bit emotional, of course, after seeing this document. It brings back again memories, and I'm sure Neta understands. But before I talk about myself, I want to talk about Khalil. Khalil Abu Yahya, who was my student for 4 years, in fact. And he became a BDS activist. He joined the BDS movement and he became a one-state activist, believing in the same political program we are defending, a secular democratic, the one-state solution, a secular democratic state for all. 1 year, I think, before shooting this film, he was diagnosed with cancer. And he went to Jerusalem, where he stayed, I think, for a month. And Neta, of course, used to visit him almost every day, where he had a massive, I think 3 massive operations at that time. And then after he came back, he decided to marry another student of mine, Tasneem Thabit. And they had 2 beautiful kids. And I remember he used to call me almost every day from the 7th of October until the middle of November. 3 hours before he was killed, together with Tasneem and their 2 little daughters and their in-laws. I think there were about 9 people in the house. Before that, their house in Jabalia refugee camp, was destroyed by the Israelis. So he moved with his wife to his in-laws' house in the Nusayrat refugee camp. Nusayrat is the place where I myself was born and where my parents also were buried in 2005, and where a horrific massacre took place last week, where 274 people were brutally killed, 2/3 of whom were children. So that was Khalil. And every single time people invite me to launch my book, Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind, here in South Africa and online, I start by talking about Khalil and by talking about Gaza and what has been going on in Gaza since October 7th until today. I myself have been displaced 4 times, in fact. The first time it was around the 10th or 11th of October. And I live in the Rimal, sort of a middle-class suburb, not far from what used to be my university. All academic institutions in Gaza have been destroyed, all, including al-Aqsa University, my university. So we were contacted by Zionist intelligence officers, and we were asked to leave the Rimal neighborhood and head to the north, al-Nasser area. And they asked us to move to the north while they were bombing the north. I mean, this is what they have been doing. This has been the habit. That night, we couldn't move. Together with my wife and my 2 little daughters, Haifa and Salma, we stayed with our neighbors, and that was the worst night of my life, of course. And that was the time when I lost my hearing. Yeah, my right ear I can't hear, and here I lost about 50% of my hearing because I needed to protect my two little kids, close their ears, etc., because they were screaming all the time. So we spent the night with the neighbors, and in the morning we found out almost the whole entire neighborhood was destroyed, and our flat was completely damaged. And we moved to the north. We stayed with my brother. And then 2-3 days after that, the same scenario was repeated. And we were asked, all residents of Gaza City and the north, I'm talking about Jabalia refugee camp, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, about 900 to 1 million people were asked to evacuate and move to the south. So I moved and stayed with my sister in Rafah until the 4th of December. And we were staying, actually, we were 7 families staying in one flat, my sister's flat. And every single night, we would hear the F-16s, Apache helicopters, destroying houses. I mean, I remember 2 of the houses adjacent to my sister's house in Rafah were destroyed in the first week of my arrival in Rafah. In one of the houses, 7 people were killed. 2 of the most hated words in Gaza right now in Arabic, anqad, rubble, and ashla, shredded bodies. And that was ashla, shredded bodies, and anqad, rubble or debris. And that remains actually to be our nightmare, myself and my wife. Luckily, I have a South African passport. And I mean, let me be honest with you, I didn't want to leave. I mean, Neta knows this very well. I mean, every single massacre, the 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, the South African embassy in Ramallah would call me and ask me whether I wanted to leave or not, and I would say no. But this time, because I lost everything. And then, I mean, that moment, there is a specific moment that I cannot forget when my kids started screaming. And I looked into their eyes because they had no choice. And I said, it's unfair. And that was the time when I decided to accept the offer by the South African embassy. So I can say that I am a genocide survivor. I am a genocide survivor, and I've been here in South Africa since December. And luckily, I came to South Africa. I mean, it's my second homeland, actually. I mean, I am a South African as well. I feel that I am a South African. As I told you, Zaya, I am a citizen of the world. So, I'm not restricted to my, national identity, religious identity, etc. So we have been trying to deal with the trauma, and I must say that it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy at all because I have lost more than 40 of my cousins and relatives. We've lost more than 100 academics, including 10 of my colleagues and hundreds of my students. Hundreds of university students. I know so many of them. The last massacre was the worst, the Nusayrat massacre personally. Of course, all the massacres were horrible, horrific. I mean, total and complete dehumanization of Palestinians of Gaza, of course. This is the precondition for any genocide. It happened during the Second World War. It happened during apartheid. It happened in Ireland, where you have settler colonies. You dehumanize the native, then you commit a massacre, and then you go to bed and you fall asleep. I mean, Hannah Arendt called it, banality of evil. And this is what has been going on. I mean, I've lost so many relatives. Last week, the Nusayrat massacre, I must say, personally, it's the worst because most of my relatives still live there. I have so many. I mean, I know every single street of Nusayrat. I was born in Nusayrat. My father was buried there. My late brother was also buried there. Almost all of my dead relatives were buried in Nusayrat. My in-laws still live in Nusayrat. They've lost their house, completely destroyed. So we are still, in a way, dealing with that trauma. And but at the same time, I can tell you that I strongly believe that this is the end of the Zionist project, the Zionist enterprise in Palestine, as a, as a settler colony. And I think the Zionists know this very well. And this is why they have become so vicious, and they want to finish the job that they had started in 1948. 1948 with ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, returning to Zarnouga. 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed. At the time, we're talking about 2/3 of the Palestinian people were ethnically cleansed. About 250,000 of them moved to Gaza, including my own family. Gaza has 8 refugee camps. What people don't know, many people don't know, and I know most of you know, but other people, that 2/3 of Gazans are refugees, in fact. I myself am a refugee from Zarnouga refugee camp. 2/3 of the Palestinians of Gaza are refugees entitled to their right of return in accordance with international law, United Nations Resolution 194. And this is the reason why apartheid, genocidal, I mean, Israel has moved from an apartheid state into a genocidal state, a fascist genocidal state. And this is why they have been targeting Gaza. What is happening right now in Gaza is a combination of ethnic cleansing and genocide. They want to get rid of 2.3, 2.4 million Palestinians living in the largest concentration camp. Mainstream human rights organizations, liberal human rights organizations, the likes of Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and even Israel's B'Tselem, call Gaza, the largest open-air prison. I think we've gone beyond that. It's an extermination camp. It's a concentration camp that has become an extermination camp. 70% of Gaza's houses and buildings have been destroyed. And I don't like to talk about figures, but sometimes we need to do that. When you talk about 38,000 people that have lost their lives within the last 8 months, more than 11,000 people are still under al-Anqad, under the rubble. 70% to 75% of those who got killed are children and women. About 16,000 children, about 12,000 women, and every single person has a story to tell of those people. My story is nothing compared to their stories. Those who are still in Gaza and those who have lost their lives. So I think, at the end of the day, and after this genocide comes to an end, I think these are the stories that we need to hear, not the stories of the leaders, of the politicians. No. We need to listen to the stories of the refugees of the Nusayrat refugee camp, of Jabalia refugee camp, of Rafah, of Deir al-Balah, of al-Maghazi. We need to mention every single camp, the name of every camp. Every single person listening to us right now needs to remember those names. I have just signed a contract to publish my second book since I arrived in South Africa. And I've decided to dedicate it to the beautiful people of Gaza, to tell their stories, to listen to those people and just learn the lesson. Because obviously the colonial West does not want to learn the lesson of the Second World War. The colonial West does not want to learn the lessons that we've learned from South Africa. And we need to remind those murderers that what is happening right now will definitely come to an end. And there will be a moment, again, like what I said in the documentary to Neta. I know it is that darkest moment of the night. Yeah, but we are paying an extremely, extremely heavy price. Thank you. I think it's enough.
Thank you, Haidar, for. I'm going to bring Neta, and I have a few more questions. To Neta, can you share something about how the two of you met, and if that feels like an important moment for you? And one more question, maybe you could explain to our audience and to us, like what happened in '93, why Haidar's family was no longer able to go back to Zarnouga, is that the so-called peace process as a result of that? But just, yeah, if you can speak to these two questions.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question of how we met. And of course, it's a life-changing moment. It's incredible how like some things that you won't expect, that are not planned, you could never planned, and how it really changes the course of for me, has been such an incredible and important connection and part of my life. So I was fortunate enough to get into Gaza on a ship called the Dignity. There were 5 ships that in 2007, 2008, or were they all in 2008? I think maybe all in 2008 that managed to get in, of the Free Gaza movement, that managed to break the siege and enter Gaza. And I was on the last one. And I asked, there were a couple of people that I had wanted to see while I was there, and Haider was one of them, and he very generously came and met me in the house of the late Doctor. Wait a second, Haider, remind me, I'm having a senior moment.
Not
Iyad Sarraj.
Yeah.
Iyad Sarraj, who is founder of Gaza Community Mental Health and also an outspoken activist himself. But so I asked to meet him, and Haider came to meet this strange Israeli woman. Luckily for me, and it I can definitely say that it, I've learned so much. I mean, Haider is a teacher to a generation of Gazans, many of whom are now facing genocide, those, and many of whom have been murdered. But also a generation of activists, and I'm honored to be one of them. And he's always, so I've learned so much, and I've been so inspired, and because he has this way of transforming, the hardest suffering into creativity and resistance. And it's just, I always feel bad because I don't always feel bad, but I feel bad about, getting strength from Haider, and he's not my only Palestinian friend who I know it's not supposed to be that way. And and now it's definitely, yeah. And I just hope that I can give back some of the strength and the wisdom and the support. And it's been so incredible. So we met, and then when I left, I came in on a ship, but because I have Israeli citizenship, I left through the Erez crossing while everybody else went back on the ship. And I would have stayed, but the government didn't want me to, the government in Gaza. So I had to leave. And when I left through the Erez crossing, I knew I would go to jail for a little while, because there were Israelis before me who had done that, Amira Haas and others. And I was expecting to go to jail for a little while, but then they had a secret file from the Secret Service saying that I was well, we don't know what it says, but the judge says that it showed that I was a serious threat to the state of Israel and its citizens, serious and concrete threat. So that meant that I could be held until the end of proceedings. But they ended up, throwing me out after 3 days, throwing me out of prison. And a few days later, the massacre of, what they call Casled in 2009 began a few days after I left prison. And every Israeli activist that was demonstrating during Casled, against Casled, and there were not many, but there were some, they all had a secret file from the Secret Service saying that they were a danger. So this was something that they were preparing. They were preparing for the first massacre for something like 6 months. secretly. And they were preparing these, forms of, making sure that in order to suppress dissent internally, that we would all be, labeled as dangerous by the Secret Service, and then therefore that we could be held. And me and Haider were in touch throughout that genocidal attack of Cast-Led, and we wrote an article together, and we just, we, went through that. And then it kind of became, we were friends outside of that as well. But it kind of became, every massacre, that's how I survived. Every genocidal attack on Gaza, before the actual genocide, the build up to the genocide, I survived through talking to Haider and being, kind of like the activist hub Haider would organize, with other Gazan civil society, and we would put out calls to the entire world, for demonstrations and, just political guidance, and that's what kept me sane. Even make.
You does Neta that you would protest on the other side of the fence, on the Israel side, and Gazan protesters were shot and killed dead. They were using live ammunition for them, and on your side,
they just.
This is much later. This is in 2019. I mean, 10 years after I met Haider, and we were already, we had been friends and a fellow comrades. Since then the Great March of Return began, which is in the film, which is the time, that we filmed that conversation, was during the Great March of Return. And during the Great March of Return, I was organizing with other Israeli anti-Zionists to join the march from the Israeli side of the fence. So we were there with Israeli flags, as you could see, and we would have phone conversations with our comrades on the other side of the fence. And we would get, beaten and arrested, sometimes, but and the people on the other side of the fence, the Palestinians demonstrating for their right to return home. We were there to welcome them, to welcome the refugees back to their homeland, to that parts of the part of their homeland that they were expelled from. And they were being, shot in the head by Israeli snipers as they demonstrated, and hundreds were killed during the Great March of Return. And that's, I think, why we had we'd filmed the conversation then, and we didn't actually finish the film until now, during the genocide. And during this genocide, it became so urgent to put the genocide in context, to talk about the Great March of Return, to talk about the fact that Palestinians in Gaza were in this concentration camp where life, the UN said, would become unlivable in 2020. And, with periodic mowing of the lawn is what Israelis call it, like periodic genocide, and thousands of Palestinian hostages in Israeli jails, before October 7th, there was, Ben Gvir was talking about, they were talking in the Knesset about executing, about legally, under Israeli law, starting to execute Palestinian hostages, prisoners. So we thought it was the context that that the people in the Gaza concentration camp, in the Gaza ghetto, had tried everything, had tried nonviolent resistance, and tens of thousands marching weekly and being mowed down weekly and continuing to march for more than a year. And the world, the UN condemned and said that it was a war crime, and there were no consequences for Israel, And they also went to the International Criminal Court and said, there are war crimes being committed here, persecute, the criminals, and nothing was done. And now they're issuing arrest warrants, but nothing has been done yet, no consequences. So I'll just finish with this, and I just want to say that if I were to say that, for example, that in such a situation that I feel it's immoral, basically, to condemn, armed resistance when no other resistance is effective and no other help is offered, no other avenue is offered, to condemn. If I were to say that, I would be in big trouble because I live in the West Bank. And the silencing is not just that they, is such in the West Bank at the moment that not just that I would be arrested, because I would be okay with that, even though the situation in the prisons since October 7th, and maybe that's something we can talk about later. But the way that they operate is that they would target my family. And this is how they've operated, before. So of course, I'm not saying that. But yeah, I'll stop here. And there was another question about 93, but I think maybe I can leave that to Haider.
If you
If that's
feel
okay.
like, explaining, I don't know if that's where you are today, if you have the energy to keep explaining to those of us who haven't done our work.
You're asking me, Zaya, sorry, my problem.
Yeah, my question is in the movie, what happened in 93 that your parents no longer could go back to Zarnouga?
Yeah, they used to live in Zarnouga. In 1948, they were expelled, of course, with the ethnic cleansing process. They moved to the Nusayrat refugee camp. And, in 1967, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Again, they wanted to finish the job. At the beginning, I think early 70s, they decided to go and visit Zarnouga, early 70s. And it was a traumatic experience. I mean, I was a little kid. I think I was 4 or 5 years or something like this. But I remember it. I remember it very well, as I said in the documentary. I mean, both of them were crying. We had our aunt and all of them are dead now, by the way, and my older sister as well. All of them are dead, and they are buried in the Nusayrat refugee camp. I have a sister who's married to a person in Bethlehem, one of my friends. I haven't been able to see her since 2000. Now, for 24 years. Now, my parents lived in the Nusayrat refugee camp. And as I said, in 2005, both of them passed away. Both of them died. And they were buried there. I was not there when they died. I was not there, and I was not allowed to, the Rafah crossing was closed. Still, Gaza was under Israeli control, and I couldn't go back. So both of them died, and they were buried, and I was not there. And that, leaves me with a guilt complex, I must say. I must admit that. Feeling very guilty for not being there for them. But I want, if you don't mind, Zaya and Maurizio, I want to touch on, the last thing that Neta has mentioned about, tools of resistance and, different forms of resistance that we Palestinians in general and Gazans in particular have exercised. Look, I've been through every single massacre since 2006 until today. In January 2006, after the destruction of Iraq, with the George Bush doctrine in the Middle East, George Bush wanted to spread democracy, classical racist, colonial mentality, spreading democracy in the Middle East. So they wanted to start with the people of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So they asked Palestinians of Gaza and the West Bank to choose their representatives in the legislative council. Of course, when I say the Palestinians of Gaza and the West Bank, we are talking about 1/3 of the Palestinian people. That is to say, Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel, 1.4 million, were not allowed to do that. 7 million Palestinian refugees living in the diaspora in exile, Manfa in Arabic, were not allowed to do that. So only those who live in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank went to the polling station. I didn't. I was in Gaza. I didn't, because I'm opposed to that. I am opposed because there is no freedom of choice here. You know, you go and vote. That was the equation. But people went to the polling stations and they voted. They voted against the will of the Americans, against the will of the Israelis, against the will of reactionary Arab regimes, against the Oslo Accords, against the two-state solution. And this is why apartheid, genocidal Israel, in cahoot with American imperialism, with the colonial West, with Arab reactionary regimes, decided to impose a deadly siege on Gaza. And this is what Neta was referring to. A deadly medieval siege. We couldn't buy petrol. We couldn't buy clean water. 97% of Gaza's water is polluted, undrinkable, by the way. We couldn't buy milk for our kids. We couldn't buy chocolate. We couldn't buy cows. We couldn't buy, I mean, you know, a very long list. And as if that was not enough, the international community was okay with that. The international community was okay with that. We resorted to popular resistance, as Neta has said. But as if that was not enough, apartheid Israel, on the 27th of December, 2008, I remember this very well because I was there. 11:15, I was driving my car. I was going for an interview, a TV interview, and I passed by the main police station in Rimal. 10 minutes after that, Israel launched a massive attack, destroyed that police station, from Beit Hanun to Rafah, within 3 minutes, killing 270 people. Had I been late, I would have been dead. 10 minutes. I mean, it took about 22 days for Israel to kill 1,200 people, including more than 430 children. So the question now, and going back to Neta's point, what did the international community do? What did the United Nations do? Security Council, European Union, the American government, Arab government, Muslim governments, absolutely nothing. And that was a message to genocidal Israel that it could come back, carry on another genocide, and the international community would be silent. And that is what happened in 2012 for 1 week. And I was there. And again, I was driving my car from our Khan Yunis campus to Gaza campus when they started their attack. And I survived that attack again. The international community was still silent. And therefore, in 2014, Israel decided to attack Gaza for 51 days. Neta was on the phone with me almost every single day. Within 51 days, apartheid Israel killed 220 people, including more than 600 children. And of course, 300 women. And the message from the international community was asking the two sides, as if you have two equal sides, you know, blaming the victim, in fact, blaming the victim for, you know, the story, the classical colonialism, blaming natives. And then comes the Great March of Return, where we lost about 270 people at the time. I took part of them, you know, the Great March of Return. Almost every Friday, I would go to the fence of the Gaza prison, Gaza ghetto. It's no longer a ghetto, it's an extermination camp. And I was there. 2021, the same thing. Now, the point is, the international community did absolutely nothing to put an end to Israel mowing the grass, as they said it. And this is one of the reasons, this is the context that ultimately led to October 7th. Now, Sderot settlement on the Israeli side used to be the village of Houj. The village of Houj. I know refugees from the village of Houj. And it is said, there is a rumor in Gaza that those youngsters on the 7th of October who cut the barbed wire and entered the village of Houj were the descendants of refugees from the village of Houj. Yeah, so that is the context, that people, white liberal mainstream media deliberately ignores. People don't want to hear these facts. That is the context. And this is why, going back to your question, Zaya, I am glad actually that my father and my mother are not alive now. What would we have done? Oh, seriously, I always keep asking. My brother is still there. My family is still there. My brother, my nieces, my nephews, and all of them are staying in one room now in Al-Qarara. They have one room and a tent. They are about 18, by the way, and they're staying in this one room and the tent. And every single day I try to get hold of them, and most of the time I fail to get hold of them, but thank goodness that they are alive. And we always say, thank goodness that my father and my mother, are not alive to witness what is happening right now. And then comes Nusayrat massacre last week, 274 people, in order to rescue 4 Israeli hostages. And at the same time, kill three Israeli hostages. And what would have, and I keep asking myself, what would, my father was politically conscious. What would he have said about this? He was very conscious. He was opposed to the Oslo Accords. He was opposed to Yasser Arafat's policy and Mahmoud Abbas's policy. He believed in, and I remember even my mother, who was illiterate, I remember the day the Oslo Accords were signed. She asked me this question. She said, the Oslo Accords, and people are celebrating. She said, why are they celebrating? And I said, because they say that there will be peace. And she said, does that mean I am returning to Zarnouga tomorrow? I said, no. She said, no, this is bullshit. Sorry. That's what she said. I don't want to use the word in Arabic because there are some Arabs listening to it. And she said, I'm sure Neta understands what I'm saying. And then, I mean, this was an illiterate woman who believed, no, if you don't implement United Nations Resolution 193, that is not justice. Peace with justice. That's what she believed in. That's what my father believed, and this is what I believe in. Okay, I think I've said enough.